Warm greetings, fellow Americans and freedom lovers worldwide. This is Mark Emery coming to you today with a fundamental presentation to really clarify in your mind the difference between operating in the public and in the private, or at law, or in equity, according to statutory code. And this will determine exactly how much control that the state has over you. So you must understand this. And you cannot complain about denial of constitutional or fundamental natural law rights if you're not positioned properly to claim those rights. Okay, so we need clarification on this first and foremost, and I'll have some very special information for business owners as to some strategy as to how you can immunize yourself from regulatory control and a lot of the financial burden that goes with that. Okay? So the first part of this is for everyone, and then I'm going to get into the specifics of interest for business owners. Okay? So in operating in law, we have to undo the indoctrination that we've had all of our lives. Okay? You've heard the statement being made that everything we've been told in our life is a lie. And that's largely true, or at least partially true, in that we've only been told half-truths. We've only been given half the story. And through deception have been led to believe that certain things are absolute when they are not, when there are alternatives. And that's what this presentation is going to illuminate for you in your mind. Okay? So let's get through this quickly. We can start with the hierarchy of order. Okay? We all understand and know that everything came from our Creator. Whatever label you use for the Creator, it's universal. All right? That Creator created man, created us according to natural law. We have God-given rights. The rights to be free, the right to think for ourselves, the right to associate with whom we want, how to live our lives, provided we don't infringe upon the rights of anybody else. This is all natural law. And this is what the Constitution for the United States was derived from, if you read that and the Declaration of Independence. Okay? So man, in living under natural law, has a direct connection to the Creator. All right? So to better organize his affairs and intercourse between the people, the states of the world, and I'm talking commercially and behaviorally, okay, in relation to intercourse, man created then the state to be subservient to the needs of mankind, okay, to better organize and provide remedy for issues that arose. All right, and so thus was born the legislative code. All right, so this is the hierarchy of order. Now, what has happened is that man has basically turned his back on God to a large degree and now worships the state and has given the state the power to rule man's life by virtue of consent and contract. It's just like Esau in the Bible. You know, we've given up all of our inheritance for a bowl of porridge. So, in the same vein, man has given up his rights in exchange for benefits from the state. So you're going to see that here as we go. So at this point in time, this hierarchy of order has been turned upside down, where now the state is man's God and dominates and rules over man, which is out of order. All right? So you understand how that works. So the law of the land relates to the assertion of federally protected rights when plainly and reasonably made is not to be defeated under the name of local practice. All right? In other words, your federal rights cannot be overturned or usurped by anything done on a local legislative or judicial basis. Okay? It has no standing. And where rights secured by the Constitution are involved, there can be no rulemaking or legislation which would abrogate them. Think about these governor lockdown orders. Now, this is the Miranda case. You've heard of the Miranda case in relation to the Miranda warning, a very important case. But what you don't hear is this very thing, that no rulemaking or legislation can abrogate those rights secured by the Constitution. Simple. Done. No ifs, ands, or buts. Okay? And those rights secured by the Constitution are given by God in the hierarchy of order. The Constitution doesn't grant or give or create rights. It merely protects those rights. It binds down mischievous men who would try to legislate those rights away. Okay, so I think most of us understand that, but we need to be very clear. Now, as it relates to privacy, there's no duty to the state, period. Quote, the individual may stand upon his constitutional rights as a citizen. He is entitled to carry on his private business in his own way. His power to contract is unlimited. He owes no duty to the state or to his neighbors to divulge his business or to open his doors to an investigation so far as it may tend to incriminate him. He owes no such duty to the state. He receives nothing therefrom beyond the protection of his life and property. His rights are such as existed by the law of the land long antecedent to the organization of the state, and can only be taken from him by due process of law, and in accordance with the Constitution. Among his rights are a refusal to incriminate himself, and the immunity of himself and his property from arrest or seizure except under a warrant of the law. He owes nothing to the public so long as he does not trespass upon their rights. That's a famous case of Hale versus Hinkle. Okay? So you're under no obligation to divulge your business. You have unlimited power to contract. You owe no duty to the state, period. If you're operating at law, in common law, as a man or woman upon the land. Okay? So this is fundamental, and many people don't understand this. Oh, well, why not disclose your finances or everything you're doing if you got nothing to hide? Well, I've got everything to hide because it's my business and nobody else's business. I have the right to privacy no matter what I'm doing. And I'm not doing anything wrong. I try to live a good, godly Christian life. Respect for everyone. But I have no duty to the state. Okay? So the point is made. And this reinforces it. This is an article that contains a number of Supreme Court sites and others basically saying that people have challenged city and county codes and land use codes and so on and so forth, and they've succeeded in what they've been doing. So this basically states that the city can only enforce ordinances to the extent that they actually own the land themselves. They cannot tell you what to do with your land as though they are the owner. So this is just proof in the pudding. So as it relates to sovereignty, let's talk about that. From Yickwo versus Hopkins, a Supreme Court case. Sovereignty itself is, of course, not subject to law, for it is the author and the source of law. But in our system, while sovereign powers are delegated to the agencies of government, sovereignty itself remains with the people, by whom and for whom all government exists and acts. And the law is the definition and limitation of power. So the law is not an extension of power, it's the limitation of power as to how far that goes. How far does the jurisdiction go? To whom and in what circumstances does a particular law apply? It's not universal. These are things that people often do not understand. Well, the law applies to everybody. Well, no, it doesn't. Specific laws apply to specific circumstances and people in a given context. And outside of that context, that law does not apply. Again, that's a myth people have to get out of their indoctrination. Okay? Now we're going to see an example of how a man used this status of sovereignty, of sovereign, as he dealt with the IRS. We'll deal with that in just a minute. So by what authority? Any one of the people have the common law right to presume non-authority of a person and to require a showing of what authority exists for the exercise by said person of some right, power, or franchise, which is claimed to be held in avoidance of the liability for tort in the trespass upon natural, common law, or statutory rights. Okay? So someone comes into your business, wants to start ordering you around, your first question ought to be, well, what's your authority? Why are you here, and what's your authority to be here? All right? The one who's asking the questions is the one who's in control. Okay? So that's just an example. We can get into a training on that. In fact, we have a couple of them. So as it relates to applying the law, there's only 3 jurisdictions that exist. Law, which is common law. Okay, in common law, for a claim to arise, there must be a corpus delicti, which is a damaged party. Bring forth the person who has been damaged and let him testify to that or show the damage. Then there's equity. Equity is for contracts. Equity arises when there's not a reasonable remedy at law, and so equity is there to resolve contracts. Okay, so you're bringing an action in equity. Show me the contract to which I'm liable. And then the third jurisdiction is admiralty and maritime. All right, for the high seas, which strangely enough is how most courts operate. Okay, again, show me the contract, maritime contract. All right, so those are the 3 jurisdictions, and then the court will snag you either with in rem jurisdiction, which is over the thing. For example, if you have real estate registered with the county courts have jurisdiction over the thing because the property is registered to them. Okay? So you're not going to avoid that. Or in personam jurisdiction is over the person. Do you claim to be a U.S. citizen? If so, then you're subject to the legislative authority of the United States and its subdivisions. Or do you claim to be as a citizen of Minnesota State? If so, then you're subject to the laws of Minnesota. Now, people are learning that there is another alternative. Rather than being a U.S. citizen, people are changing their status to that of an American national, a Minnesotan, or a Floridian state citizen versus U.S. citizen, and those are separate and distinct legal jurisdictions. So once you're on record as being a Floridian, then you cannot be held to account for the obligations of a U.S. citizen. And that's a whole nother discussion, but it's important to understand just the basics of that. Okay? So let's move on. Now, operating in the public versus the private. This is interesting. When you're doing commerce with the public, when you're engaged in commerce with the public, this is regulated. Okay, and there's no way around that. Okay, the regulatory institutions have been put into place to protect the public, and that's where the regulation comes into view. In addition to, of course, the revenue generation that comes from it as well. But when you have a business that's open to the public, you have engaged in commerce with the public, and therefore your business is subject to regulation. Okay, you operate by legislative privilege. All right, you're operating by virtue of a state franchise. Okay, on the other hand, private contracts are not regulated, and of course we all have the God-given right to contract and the right to work, the right to associate, freely assemble, and so on and so forth. All right, now this is done by invitation only, exclusively with members, not with the public. This is a closed circle, not open to the public, only to members. Okay, now you're operating in the private, and this is where we get the private membership association. Many businesses are able to form as a PMA and not deal with the public and not have to deal with commerce. So that's a separation right there that's quite significant. Okay? So typically, again, when you're dealing with the public, you're dealing as a corporation, a limited liability company, a partnership, statutory trust, something along those lines. And remember, that which the state creates, it can control. Okay? So, just like the organic law and creation of man, all right, that which God creates, he can control. That which the state creates, it can control. Corporations, other state-controlled entities. So whenever you're benefiting from the exercise of a state franchise, there's always a return obligation, and that would be a fealty to the state statutes. Okay? On the other hand, you've got a right to contract, all right? Right to free association, right to work. And again, with your own personal privacy, you have no obligation to the state if you're operating in that context. So no obligation means nothing to file, no compliance requirements, no tax obligations, because you're not engaged in a regulated taxable commerce, right? You're engaged in private business, private work activity, okay? And the only taxes you'll have to ever pay are use taxes, paying the toll to go down the road, paying the gasoline taxes, which provides for the roads. Okay, so you're starting to get the idea here? There's a distinct line of delineation between these two. So with that in mind, okay, well, people feel fearful. How do we get into trouble? How do they attack us? How do they come after us? Okay, how can they hurt us? Well, one is the state may try to issue a civil complaint for one thing or another. All right, which means they go after your stuff, put liens on your property, issue fines, go after your bank accounts like the IRS loves to do, and things like that. All right, so they'll go after your stuff. And then secondly, they will start a criminal action. Well, to make a criminal charge stick, they've got to prove intent to violate the law. All right? And it's very simple to nullify both of these roads which they use to attack us. Okay? So if you block those roads, you're home free. You put your stuff out of reach where they can't touch it. You don't have anything in your name anymore. And we can set the record very easily to show your good faith and intent to comply with the law by reminding them what the law actually is, agreeing to do whatever they request you to do, conditional upon them, the state or whoever, the attacker, conditional upon them showing what authority they have to make their demands. Okay, so you see how things are starting to come together. So if they can't get your stuff, and if you've shown good faith the whole way in compliance with the applicable law, guess what? To whoever's trying to make a claim against you, it's bye-bye, buddy. Okay? Leave me alone. So let's talk about helping business owners. All right? Typically when you're running a business, again, you're doing business with the public, you're engaged in commerce, you're subject to the benefits of the state franchise by having a business corporation or LLC, and all of these things have liabilities. Okay, so you have to deal with the government, the IRS, the courts potentially, any freeloader who comes along who wants to create an incident and sue you for damages because you had a banana peel on the floor which they threw down and they slipped on and claimed damages. All right, so you've got that to deal with, and invariably, of course, then if any claim is made, it's made against not only the business but also the business owner. Well, the buck stops with you. You started the business, you benefit from the business, so you're wrapped up in any potential liability or claim against that business. Okay? That's a very vulnerable position to be in. And you don't want to be in that position. All right? So there are options to deal with that. All right? Let's just say that we set up a non-statutory common law contractual business organization. Just for simplicity, let's call it a non-statutory trust. All right? And you can transfer ownership of the business to that trust where you no longer are the owner. All right? Now, in view of that transfer, it's just like a buyer coming along wanting to buy the business. But rather than receiving cash, you do an exchange by contract. Ownership of the business is exchanged for certificate units of the non-statutory trust or business trust. Okay? Now, those certificate units do not have an organized market like the stock market where you could go to sell stock, where you have price availability, market prices available. Okay? So in order for any event to be deemed taxable, a taxable event, fair market value must be established so that you can determine either a gain or a loss. And if there's a gain, then obviously that would be a taxable event. But if you're receiving certificate units with no readily available fair market value, then what you have is a tax-deferred situation, so that until such a time as you can sell those certificate units, you would never be able to put a price on it, nor a gain, thus a capital gain and tax that goes with that. Okay, so you follow me there? So it's a very simple transaction that can be done. All right, so what you've done is you've removed personal liability as owner of the business, and you've shifted that to the business trust, okay, away from yourself. Now you're just a hired hand. All right, so you've removed that personal liability from potential attackers. All right, now whether the ownership of the business is transferred or the entire business is totally converted to a non-statutory business trust, that's a question to be raised. Okay? It's possible that business could be converted entirely and then not have any liability to the statutory world. All right? It doesn't work in all cases, but that would need to be evaluated. At least you've been able to remove yourself personally as the owner of that business and shift that liability to one that is almost impenetrable. Okay? So let's take a look at another scenario with these arrangements in mind. Here you are with your money, and you've got the banks, the courts, the government, the predators. They've all got their eyes on your money, all right? They want to get a hold of it one way or the other. All right, now, understanding this, you make certain arrangements where you might have established a private account with a gold vault, let's just say in Switzerland or Singapore or anywhere offshore, okay? You could send those funds to purchase gold in that account and have that vault hold those funds for you, okay? Now, we're talking about after-tax dollars here, okay? Unless, of course, you're fortunate enough to have positioned yourself where those taxes do not apply, and that's what smart people do, entirely safe and lawful. So now you've converted cash, which is normally seizable in a local bank, you've transferred that into gold in an offshore vault, which is intrinsically much more difficult to get to. All right? And within that gold dealer, you've got a private account and you've got a contractual business organization. We'll call that a trust. There's a trust account. So within the gold dealer, you could actually transfer value from your private account to the trust account, and that would be totally private, an internal operation within the gold dealer and his platform. All right? So if ever forced to fill out a financial statement, you could truthfully say, you know, those assets are no longer yours, and all you have in exchange is a certificate unit with no fair market value attached. Okay? So now the international trustee managing the private trust is able to put those funds to use in a more productive way, perhaps. Let's say through the trust, if you wanted to start building a diversified tax-free portfolio, that could be done, okay? And the private trust would be the owner. All right? What kind of a portfolio would you like to build? You are the agent now for the trustee managing the business of the trust. Trustee doesn't have the time or the interest to want to deal with all that. So you are appointed to manage that. All right? And when the time comes, you want to liquidate certain assets. Those get liquidated, go back to the trustee, perhaps back into the gold vault. And as such, you could access that through wire transfers being sent or debit card for access to the liquid value of those assets. Okay? And what have we done? We've completely avoided the institutionalized world and kept everything totally in the private. Okay? So now, let's just have some fun with definitions, all right? This is taken right out of the Internal Revenue Code. Title 26 of the U.S. Code is the Internal Revenue Code. And looking at these definitions, take a look at this. Definition here, A, when used in this title, where not otherwise distinctly expressed or manifestly incompatible with the intent thereof. 9, the United States. The term United States, when used in a geographic sense, includes only the states and the District of Columbia. Now, in common vernacular, we just are indoctrinated to think of the common usage of the word states. Well, we're thinking only the states, like Vermont, Washington, Florida, Texas, and the District of Columbia. But that's not how legalese works. When they use the term includes, that means to the exclusion of everything else. So what we're saying here, because the law is very specific, you can't say, well, it includes this, but it could also include a bunch of other stuff that we're not going to mention. That doesn't work like that, okay? So what they're saying here is that when used in a geographic sense, it includes only the states and the District of Columbia. Okay, so what are the states then? Let's look at the definition of the word states, which we find in definition 10. State, the term state shall be construed to include, at the exclusion of everything else, the District of Columbia. Well, isn't that interesting? So now, with this definition in mind, let's go back and reinterpret definition 9. So then what they're saying is the United States, when used in the geographic sense, includes only the District of Columbia and the District of Columbia. You see how legalese works, okay? Now, you have to pay taxes if you're engaged in a trade or business within the United States, right? So what do they define trade or business as? Definition 26. The term trade or business includes the performance of the functions of a public office. Did you get that? So, if you're engaged in a trade or business in the United States, what that means is you're engaged in a public office in the District of Columbia. Wow. Does that change your perception of reality? Do you see how when people say, well, the law applies to everybody, you see how that's a false statement? You see how legalese works? Now, definition 31, for an estate or trust. The terms for an estate or trust mean an estate or trust, and you, by the way, are an estate, the income of which, from sources without the United States, which is not effectively connected with the conduct of a trade or business within the United States, is not includable in gross income under subtitle A. Understand the impact of that. So, a foreign estate or trust means an estate or trust, the income of which comes from outside the District of Columbia and is not effectively connected with a public office within the District of Columbia, is not includable in gross income under subtitle A. So if you're not generating income as a public official in a public office in Washington, D.C., I have only one question. Why are you filing and paying taxes on income declared under subtitle A? So you see how things work here, all right? Just a few little tidbits for you. And let's take a look at an actual letter. This is the textual extract from an actual letter that was sent back in 1990. And let me show you how these things work and the results that can be achieved. Okay? So, dear District Director of the Internal Revenue, on or about December 1st, 1990, I received an unsigned document, which they're famous for. Nobody wants to take authority for what they're sending, all right? Authority only comes when someone takes risk. You take risk when you put your name to something and are to be held accountable for it. An unsigned document is totally meaningless and worthless. Okay, anyway. So I received this document claiming that you have not received the tax return and requesting that a Form 1040 be filed. I've enclosed a copy of that request for reference. I know of no such code that requires me to file a tax return 1040. If you know such a code, please identify that code for me. Okay, so if I'm in error, please correct me. I want to do the right thing here. I'm acting in good faith. I have enclosed a copy of the letter that I have sent to the Director of Foreign Operations District concerning this matter. And this is the context of the letter. In researching the Revenue Code book, which your people kindly supplied to me, I discovered that only an individual is required to file a tax return. That's in 26 U.S.C. 6012. And then only under certain circumstances. In looking at Section 7701A, 1 of the Code, I discovered the term individual is defined as a person. Then, in checking 7701A 30, I discovered the definition of a United States person as meaning a citizen of the United States, resident of the United States, domestic corporation, domestic partnership, and or a domestic trust or estate. There is no individual defined under 7701, and therefore I cannot be an individual within the meaning of 7701, paragraph A, subsection 1, and or Title 26 U.S.C., section 6012. As well, the Supreme Court in the case of Wills versus Michigan State Police, at volume 105, Lawyers Edition, second edition, section 45, the case in 1989, made it perfectly clear that I, the sovereign, cannot be named in any statute as merely a person or any person. I'm a member of the sovereignty, as defined in Yick-Wo versus Hopkins. We referred to that a few minutes ago, and the Dred Scott case. Therefore, and until you can prove otherwise, I am not a taxpayer by definition, nor an individual that is required to file a tax return. Please forward to me a letter stating that I'm not liable for this tax return, or, in the alternative, produce the documentation that requires me to file the requested tax return, 1040. If you have any questions concerning this letter, please write to me at the address below. Please sign all papers so that I know who I'm dealing with. Until such a time as I hear from your office, I will take the position that I am no longer liable for filing the return. Failure to respond will be taken as meaning that you have acquiesced, and that from this date forward, the doctrine of estoppel by acquiescence will prevail. Sincerely, NRA, initials. So, what did that result in? Let's see the result. The IRS takes their time. They finally send him a reply, and this is an extract from the actual letter. In essence saying, "Dear taxpayer, based on our information, you are no longer liable for filing this tax return. We may contact you in the future if issues arise that need clarification. You do not need to reply to this letter." Well, it seems that good old NRA did all the clarification that was necessary, and no further clarification is needed. All right? So, you see the power of knowledge. And in the alternative, you see the cost of ignorance. All right? So these are but a sampling of some of the many things that you can learn as a member of the Lighthouse Law Club. You're invited to visit the website the international business trust and asset protection strategies become accessible as a global entrepreneur member. We have 2 levels of membership: the full benefits member, and then the advanced membership is the global entrepreneur membership. So you're invited to explore those, and if you seek any type of empowerment similar to what you've seen here, then you know what to do. So anyway, thank you for your attention. I hope you've learned a few things. I hope this empowers you to move forward in a proactive and positive way of positioning yourself so that you can be fully compliant in every single law that applies to you and not have to worry about the ones that don't. Got it? Take care. God bless. We'll be in touch.